Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Over the last week, you would be hard-pressed not to hear a new government initiative to tackle housing. But what in those measures is there to tackle homelessness? Downtown Eastside advocates say not enough is being done, and homelessness is at risk of escalating even more. We'll hear from them and ask you, how much has homelessness risen in your own community, and do you see any solutions? After 12:30, we'll take your questions on how to protect your child from online harms. The Exploitation Education Institute takes your calls. I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. Thank you for joining us on CBC Radio 1, CBC Television, and live streaming on the CBC News app, cbc.ca/BC, on the CBC Vancouver YouTube as well. Well, a report released just about an hour ago by the Carnegie Housing Project warns that the number of homeless people in Vancouver will continue to rise unless governments change their actions. Called This Isn't Working, the report states that the number will increase from about 3,150 today to 4,700 people in 2030 if the government doesn't take immediate action. We're going to hear from the Carnegie Housing Project about the report and what they would like to see. We're also asking you, how much has homelessness increased in your community? And what are some solutions you see or would like to see? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca or text us 236-330-2623. Well, we're joined now by Devin O'Leary, who is the manager of the Carnegie Housing Project and co-author of the report. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Can you tell us about this report? What prompted it, and how did you go about collecting the information?
So the idea for the report started early last year at the height of the Hastings Street encampment in the downtown east side. There were a lot of people living on the block outside, and we didn't really hear a lot of positive aspirations from government about how it should be handled. And so, but from the community, there were a lot of people saying what they wanted. And so I've been working with Jean Swanson for the past year, talking with people who are unhoused and the community groups that serve them to collect all of those recommendations and then organize them and try and get them out into the community so people can be educated on what can be done and try and hold the decision makers accountable for implementing them.
During the decampment at Hastings, we obviously heard from different perspectives on why it was being done and what the impact of it was on people who live there. How would you describe what happened there compared to perhaps other times when tent cities were removed, for example, at Oppenheimer Park?
Yeah, so personally, I moved to the downtown east side during the Hastings Street encampment. And so most of my experience is limited to that and to the Oppenheimer and Strathcona parks. I didn't have any firsthand experience, but just from reports from the approach that government did take is they took the time to place everybody in housing. So they had their Heart and Hearth program going and meeting people and making sure that they had a place to go. But even with that, many people relocated to Crab Park because the available housing really wasn't safe for them. And when it came to the Hastings Street encampment, it was done a lot faster, there was a lot less planning that went into it. Even whenever they announced it, they said that there were 300 new housing units that would be made available in June, but they went through with the decampment in April. So, and even with the shelter spaces, all the shelters were saying that they were having to turn away people all day and night.
Devin, we've seen encampments in many parts of the province. I know your report is on the downtown east side in Vancouver, but we've seen them obviously in other places as well, Kelowna, Prince George. What is that a sign of, do you think? Why are we seeing more people living in encampments?
I think there's a lot of factors that are going into it, but uh, I mean, I think with everybody, it's just there's been years and years of pressure uh, pushing people out of housing because rents are rising. People lost a lot of work during the pandemic. Um, and I think a lot of the houselessness just became more visible. Uh, the um, houselessness has been increasing
Mm.
every year, uh, but it's not a new phenomenon, at least within the last decade or so. But what we are seeing is that uh, a big change happened in the early 90s when the federal government stopped spending money on public housing,
Mm.
and rentals mostly went into the private market, and that really put pressure on working class people. And so I think where we're at today is kind of the most visible symptom of kind of decades of austerity, government spending,
Mm.
and stagnant wages really for working class people. Um,
I'll ask you
yeah,
more
and
about that, what the government needs to do, and I'll put out the numbers once again. Asking you, our audience, what have you seen in your own community? We're talking to the Carnegie Housing Project right now, and the manager, Devin O'Leary, who's co author of a new report, which is called This Isn't Working. In a sense, saying whatever the government is doing to tackle the problem of homelessness is not working. And unless there is immediate action from government, they say that there will just be an escalation of homelessness in Vancouver by 2030. And so we're asking you, how much has homelessness risen in your own community in BC? And are there any solutions that you see around you or that you would like to see? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. And you can also hit pound 690 on your cell phone. By email, it's bctoday@cbc.ca. You can also text us at 236-330-2623. And Devin O'Leary is with me from the Carnegie Housing Project. I want to ask you about what governments haven't done and what they need to do based on your report. But I also just want to note that you said houselessness. Houseless is the term that you use in your report. Can you tell us more about that?
yeah, so whenever we talk about homes, um, it people they create it depends. So there's varying definitions, but while some people they'll say that they might be unhoused and not have a formal shelter, but they create their own shelter and they have their own belongings, and they want to create and they create a sense of home for themselves, because a home is a human right, and they are asserting that human right by creating their own home. Whenever the market and the government have not made the formal housing available. There's also the idea of home, of being in a place. There are people who have lived in Vancouver their entire lives, and they are unhoused because the cost of living has gotten so high, but they still consider Vancouver their home. You also have people who are members of host nations, Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, that they're living unhoused, and they absolutely want to assert their right to this being their home.
And what do you
Um,
hope that term, shifting to using, to seeing people as creating their homes regardless of where they live, and using the term houselessness, what do you hope that changes in terms of our discourse, our conversation, how governments tackle this?
yeah, I mean, I think that it tries to give people more of the dignity they deserve, of and respect for trying to make it work. They aren't the biggest issue that people face is that whenever it comes to being unhoused is the actual houselessness, the fact that they don't have a structure, they don't have a house. And so I think it's kind of honoring the work that people put into getting or get into the work that people put into like trying to get a house, but also like maintaining a home and a life as they go on. Like there's people who they have to live in shelters for years, even though they're working full-time jobs, just because they can't have a house. And I think that it's honoring that they are creating a home and have the right to create a home.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I hear you. What do you think it needs to be done then? You said you used the term austere, that governments have been austere in tackling this. We know we just had the BC budget tabled last week for the next year. They say that over the next 3 years, investments in housing will be about $2.4 billion. That's housing altogether. What is lacking? And you know, when you say this isn't working, what is lacking when it comes to how governments are dealing with homelessness?
Yeah, there's kind of like since the 80s and 90s, there's really been the narrative that the market solves all problems has really been committed to, and so there's been less and less regulation in housing. And as we see the private housing market becoming more financialized, and so it's more used as a profit making tool for people and an investment tool. And so that's why we're seeing rents getting pushed up. Everybody's trying to make their buck. At the same time, there's no real pressure on wages keeping pace with those. So that's the government not raising minimum wages, the city of Vancouver shooting down the living wage for city employees, and then for people who are on a basic pension or are on disability, they're only getting about $1,800 a month with a $500 shelter rate portion.
And so, pardon me, I will just note that just yesterday, the province announced an increase to the minimum wage coming in June up to $17.40. Aside from that, what do you want to see now? I know your report talks about things like use of SROs that have been closed down, use of modular housing projects. You know, palpably, you know, tangibly, what are some solutions now that the government, both provincial, federal, and municipal, need to take?
Yeah, so we highlight three things. So one of them is stopping the loss of affordable housing. So right now in Vancouver, there have been a total of around 860 modular housing units that are rented at shelter rate. And they were on temporary leases with the expectation that housing would be built for the demand at the time, but that housing has not been built. And so those leases are expiring, those modular housing buildings are being taken down, and that's 860 shelter rate units that we are losing, and there's no plan to relocate them or keep them in Vancouver.
Why not?
We also highlight the need to actually plan for more housing, and so that is funding more housing that people can actually afford. Right now, there's most of the money, the federal government announced a $2 billion financed loan to BC for middle income housing. And most of the provincial plans, especially for their BC Builds program, is for middle income housing, which is people making $85,000 a year. And that doesn't include the people that need it the most.
Right. Does it help, though, to ensure that what they consider middle income aren't pushed to become as vulnerable, to become houseless, as you say? You know, does it all become part of one big, pot of solutions?
Yeah, and it's a huge pot, and so they need to take accountability for the size of that pot, and especially recognize the people that have been pushed out already.
Mm.
So yeah, I mean, people on middle incomes, working class people in general, um, all deserve a place to live and have been put under stress because of the financialization of housing and the profit making of housing.
Okay.
And so that absolutely does need to be taken care of. But we're in an emergency state right now with 3,100 people that are living on the street.
Okay. That's my guest is Devin O'Leary with the Carnegie Housing Project, asking you about what you've seen in your community. How much has homelessness risen and increased, and what are some solutions that you would like to see? Our numbers again, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. And Victoria is one place dealing with this issue, and Jane is calling us from there. Hi, Jane. Hi there, Jane. Hi, Jane. Can you hear me? Okay. My apologies. I think we've lost our connection with Jane. Let's head to Charlene at Main Island. Hi, Charlene.
Hello.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on rising homelessness?
Well, I have two comments. First of all, the best thing that the government could do is to go back to building co-ops. They were the most successful and long-lived government-funded housing arrangements that governments ever did, both federal and provincial. They stopped doing it decades ago, and it's a real shame because for people who are homeless, houseless, there are ways to accommodate them in co-ops and also all the increasing number of families who can't afford it. Mm-hmm. Secondly, though, what I want to say is, and I see this on Facebook posts all the time, people saying, why doesn't somebody just do something about the homeless? And the point is that we have to be prepared to bite the bullet big time in tax increases, because it isn't just a matter of providing some little SRO room or a converted container. People are houseless, homeless for a variety of reasons, which involve mental health, physical health, addiction, and we don't have anywhere near the services for all that. And
so people should just say, look, this is going to need some increase in taxes, and if we want to solve this issue, I should be prepared to take that hit.
Absolutely.
I guess I wonder how people would react to that, do you think, given increases in their own expenses?
Well, I would love to say your reaction has to be something fairly simple. If you're not prepared to pay for it, shut up about it. You see, for example, just the other day, I was looking at a Facebook post about Duncan and all the addicts and thefts and fires and so on that are happening in Duncan. And people rant and say something should be done about it. Right. Well, and even if you're talking about greater policing, you're talking about an increase in penal institutions, probation officers, social workers, doctors, the whole slew of people who have to address a problem, and it's not going to come free.
Charlene, really good to hear from you. Thank you so much for those points. Saying, yes, people, if you would like a solution, as she sees from those Facebook posts, that might mean paying more in taxes. And she's talked about co-ops as well, and that is something that we know we heard from the BC government last week in terms of this BC Builds program. And one of the development projects has to do with a new co-op project in Vancouver. So Charlene, thanks for raising the point about co-ops as well. Let's head to Diane in Victoria. Hi, Diane. Thanks for calling.
Hi there. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
I've been enjoying the show and appreciate the comments that your guest speaker has been making. And there's been a lot of focus in the conversation on housing and affordability. But I just want to make a comment. I worked as a street nurse down in Hastings in Vancouver a number of years ago. And my impression even now is that probably 80% of the homeless or houseless people are mental health and addictions related, like they're not job related or affordability related. These are people with serious problems and very little support. And so I wanted to put forth the idea. I don't know if it's been put forth before, but I keep hearing about co-op housing is one idea. They did try in Victoria putting the homeless people into the Travelers Inn. They renovated it, and
Right, I remember that.
and there's been a few other incidences, and what happens is the places get trashed, and I don't mean that in a mean way. It's just that the people don't have skills. Many of the people that I worked with don't have life skills. They can't cook, and I'm sorry, I've got a cold.
No, it's okay. No, but you're
Because
saying
they
there needs
can't-
to be that mental health support system around the
Well,
housing.
what I would suggest, the very best thing the government could invest in is placing, you'd have to do a triage, but placing these people into group homes. That's the absolute. I have done group home work as well. They have a stable home environment. There's usually a group of about 6 or 8 people. They're fed healthy food. They're taught life skills. They're taken on field trips. They are fully supported. And services do come in, like social services.
Right.
So the only solution for people that don't have, we're talking people that grew up in heroin addicted homes and were sexually abused as children. And
that's part of it for sure. That's part of it, but we
Yeah.
certainly don't want to generalize.
You
But Diane,
throw these people into an apartment and say, here's your
that
shelter.
it's done.
You can't do it.
Appreciate your point as well,
Thank
Diane.
you.
Really good to hear some suggestions from our listeners and our audience on this as well. And Devin, it sounds like you've prompted this conversation. I can hear them saying houseless, homeless, and so terminology changing there, but also just prompting people to think of what are the solutions to this. Appreciate your time very much. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
That is Devin O'Leary, the Carnegie Housing Project Manager. It's 12:27 now, 1:27 in the Mountain Time Zone. You're with BC Today. And we have some emails on this as well. River writes, the amount of unhoused people I see in my community has risen significantly. The resources available to them are conditional and usually dependent on charity. Housing is and should always be a right, and until we remove the profit from housing, these people will continue to suffer. Lisa writes, I live in Victoria. It has increased greatly. Here's what I don't understand. We know there is a shortage of housing and of mental health assistance available when needed, including drug usage. So why is the federal government accepting more refugees or immigrants? Thank you for your emails. Again, our address is bctoday@cbc.ca. If you want to send us your thoughts, you can text us to 236-330-2623. And once again, that report coming today from the Carnegie Housing Project, warning that homelessness, they call it houselessness, in downtown Vancouver, in the downtown east side, will only escalate from 3,150 people today in Vancouver to 4,700 people in 2030, and that's if the government doesn't take action. The report has some recommendations when it comes to using the vacant SROs at the moment, modular housing, and looking to supports and solutions around shelter beds as well. So a lot of recommendations there from this report. We'll have more coverage on this throughout the day here on CBC, and reaction as well from the housing minister. Our reporter Belle Puri is on this story and is seeking comment, as we are as well, from housing minister Ravi Kahlon. This is BC Today. Now, stay with us here on the show. In our next half hour, we'll discuss how to protect your children from online abuse. The federal government has introduced a new bill that aims to help with that. It's called the Online Harms Act. Amanda Todd's mother says parents and caregivers still have a role to play. Here's Carol Todd speaking to CBC.
Having the Online Harms Act is only one piece. We still need to learn as adults what exploitation is, how it can happen, where it can happen, about privacy content, about making sure our kids aren't giving out information to people they don't know. Those are all things that a government act won't do. like a government act won't have those deep conversations with the kids that we know. And so those are really important also, but we need to make it far easier for our parents and caregivers to be able to have those conversations. We need to ensure that the parents and caregivers are able to find places to learn about what they want to have the conversations about. And we have to find a way to make kids listen, because you know what? At 14, 15, 16, they think they are invincible, that nothing will happen to them. But just like Amanda's story, it can, and it can happen without even the kids knowing it. And before that, they're funneling down a tunnel and they don't know how to get out of it. And so that's why it's important that we have those conversations. So if a child is feeling that they are going down that tunnel, they need to be able to go to someone and ask for support. And there's no shame, no embarrassment, and no judgment.
That's Carol Todd speaking to CBC. Well, how are you finding information? What are your questions about how you can talk to your child and protect your child from online harms? We're going to take your calls. You can call us now, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, or pound 690 on your cell phone. We'll have an expert in online exploitation taking your calls. That's coming up after the CBC News Update with Robert Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. A Central Coast First Nation is suing the federal government for infringing on its Aboriginal rights by banning one of its commercial fisheries 2 years ago. The Heiltsuk Nation filed the civil suit in BC Supreme Court, challenging the Fisheries Department's decision to close the commercial harvest of the herring spawn on kelp in the nation's territory. The lawsuit says the closure disrupted both an economic lifeline as well as a cultural cornerstone for the nation. The provincial government has formally apologized to the Sons of Freedom Doukhobors. The apology in the legislature today was a recognition of historical wrongs the province committed against the group. The Doukhobors fled persecution in Russia in 1899, and many settled in the Kootenay Boundary region. And BC's minimum wage is going up to $17.40 an hour at the beginning of June. Social agencies say the wage is still far below a living wage, while businesses groups say the increase is another blow to companies already fighting to survive. And now the forecast: heavy snow is expected in parts of the province today, with warnings issued for sections of the Central Coast, Howe Sound and Whistler. Environment Canada says the afternoon commute here in the Lower Mainland could also be affected, with up to 10 centimeters coming. On the North Coast, snow mixed with rain this afternoon and a high of 3. Highs to -18 with sunshine in the Peace. In the central interior, a chance of light snow with a high of -11. And highs from -4 to +1 with a mix of sun and cloud in the Kootenays and Okanagan. And that's your CBC News Update from Vancouver.
Rob, thank you very much.
Sure.
Robert Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. This is BC Today, and last Friday, we told you the news that low-budget carrier Lynx Air was ceasing operations. It came as a shock to many passengers. Our own BC Today producer, Melody Jacobson, happened to be one of those passengers on Saturday. And this happened to be the very last flight to leave Vancouver to travel to Calgary. And here's the moment a crew member gave an emotional sign-off as the plane touched down at YYC.
Hello everyone. Just before I welcome you all to Calgary, just want to say a few words. We hope you had a pleasant flight to Calgary today. It is with a very heavy heart I say this is our crew's last operating flight as Lynx Air cabin crew members. We will forever be grateful for the opportunity to grow and learn so much about aviation. It has always been truly a dream come true. We are proud of the time with Lynx and 100 of unforgettable memories. We'll cherish the lessons from this chapter and our careers and miss being surrounded with amazing people. We have truly made lifelong friends here at Lynx. With that being said, I'm on behalf of your cabin crew. This is Sean, signing off for the last time.
certainly sounds bittersweet and very touching indeed, and really touching to hear the applause from the passengers as well. This is BC Today. Well, a note now that our next topic will deal with online exploitation of youth and may not be appropriate for all listeners. Well, from Amanda Todd, whose mother you heard just in the last half hour, to 12-year-old Carson Cleland, the effects of online abuse can be tragic. And yesterday, the federal government tabled a new Online Harms Act, and this follows recent new legislation and measures by the BC government. Here's Federal Justice Minister and Attorney General Arif Virani speaking to CBC's David Cochran on Power and Politics about the federal bill.
The message that I have for parents, and I include myself among them, I've got two youngsters at home, is that there's a lot of scary things out there that are on the internet. And what I find troubling is that there's more rules for my son's Lego than there is for the most dangerous toy in my home and in every home in this country. And that toy is the screen that your child is on right now, whether that's a phone, a tablet, or a computer screen. And we are changing that with this legislation because protecting kids is fundamentally what this legislation is all about. There is a duty to have content removed within a 24-hour window of content that would exploit a child sexually. That is critical because of what is happening right now online is that there are sexual predators and pedophiles that are seeking to reach out to our children, unbeknownst to us very often. And what I find troubling is that for a long time people have said to me, well, Minister Virani, isn't that a problem with parents? Shouldn't parents be addressing this themselves? Why do we need to have more aggressive rules about what is happening online? What I say to that is that just like every other parent out there, I tried and hopefully successfully have taught my kids how to cross the road, looking left, looking right. But I also know that there are rules of the road. There are stoplights, there are stop signs, there are red lights, there are speed limits. Right now you can empower your kids till you're blue in the face about the dangers that lurk online. There's not enough rules for what's happening online. With this law, we are changing that.
Justice Minister Arif Virani speaking about the need for more rules to protect kids from online harms. Now, if you need help with mental health, here are some resources for you. The Kids Help Phone is 1-800-668-6868. You can also dial or text 988 anytime to get mental health support. Well, for any parent, it can be overwhelming to think, how can I protect my child? With all the apps and chat platforms and social media to watch out for, how can we even keep up and ensure our child is safe from online exploitation? We have an expert here to take your questions. What do you need to know to be able to protect your child from harmful content or abuse online? And what do you want to know about how internet companies and governments are trying to prevent this? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone, by email bctoday@cbc.ca, and by text 236-330-2623. Tiana Sharifi is CEO of the Exploitation Education Institute. She joins me here in studio. Hello, good afternoon.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much for being here. It seems like there is a lot governments are trying to do. How serious is this problem of online harms and youth?
It's incredibly serious, and I think that we don't give it as much credit because it's something that we don't physically see. But if you knew that there were 750,000 predatory people in your actual physical space trying to connect with your child, you'd have definitely much more proactiveness and really realization of how much harm there can be. And so what we're seeing right now, and I'm so grateful for it, is there's such a movement to hold these companies accountable and to have our legislation incorporate the digital harm that does and can occur with our kids.
You know, Carol Todd, when she was interviewed by CBC, she said when she was going through this with her own daughter, Amanda, she didn't know where to go. She would look things up. She would, punch things into the computer and nothing would come up, nowhere to turn. How challenging has it been for victims and their families?
I definitely think that until recent, when we're seeing these new legislations come into place, it has been incredibly challenging. I mean, we go and we provide presentations to parents in all different communities, and it seems that the concerns are the same across, across different cities of where do I go? How do I start the conversation? What are the things that I say? What do I need to look out for? And also, this is so overwhelming.
Yes.
How can I possibly?
It really is.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I'm a parent of teens, and I try to stay on top of things like the platforms. I try to familiarize myself with Discord and Roblox, but I'm pretty sure I've only hit the tip of the iceberg. So what do you tell parents to say, where do I even start?
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing to say, and I say this in our parent presentations, if I were to have created a toolkit with all of these platforms and the guides to them and give them to you today, they would be outdated.
Exactly, that's right.
Yeah, exactly. So what we do is we say we have to look at very tangible, specific guidelines that would be across platforms that speak to the behaviors that we see from these predatory people and from exploitation.
Okay, so what to watch out for?
Exactly, yes.
Okay.
So one of those things that we really emphasize with parents is having a conversation with your child about what healthy friends and followers look like. So rather than pointing to stranger danger, because nobody online is a stranger anymore, we use the term friends and followers, and we look at, well, what does it look like for somebody online to be unhealthy towards you, to not respect your consent, to infringe on your boundaries, to act predatory, and what are those red flags? So one of them being that if you're talking to a friend or a follower on one platform and they ask for you to add them on a different one, that's a huge red flag. We call that switching platforms.
Why?
So great question. So the reason being is typically we see a request to switch to a platform that is more secure and gives that predatory person information without them having to ask for it. So if we're on Instagram and I want a picture of you, I have to ask you for it. But if I say add me on Snapchat, where the whole point of the platform is image sharing, I don't have to ask you for that photo. So a lot of times it's a switch to a different platform that provides more security, more information, and it's not typical healthy friend and follower behavior.
Okay.
So that's definitely one of the key ones that we speak to.
Wow. Now you also said nobody's a stranger online anymore. Why?
Yeah. So, if you think about somebody wanting to add you on Facebook, what is that person called? A friend.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if somebody wants to look at your content on Instagram.
Whether you know them or not in real life.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So completely regardless of what your relationship is, you are going to use the terminology friend or follower.
Yeah.
And so that really takes away this concept of stranger danger.
Right.
Yeah, and puts us into this situation where we have to use relatable language, and it really speaks to the behaviors of predatory behaviors rather than the stereotype image of this creepy, scary person that's lurking in the basement.
Okay. Yeah, we have to change, almost have to change the way we used to approach these topics. Using the term stranger danger was so endemic to how we talk to our kids about public safety. And what are some other red flags that parents can watch out for?
Absolutely. So talking to your kids about there's nothing typical or healthy of somebody offering you things online. So if you are looking for a job, you would have to go on a platform and apply and post your resume. If somebody's reaching out to you on social media and saying, hey, I have a way that you can make quick, easy cash, that's a red flag. Oh. So any kind of gifting, whether that's Roblox tokens or TikTok rewards or money for your photos or modeling gigs, if someone reaches out to you offering that, definitely something that you want to check in with a parent or an adult about. That's a red flag too.
Oh my God. How do I start this conversation with my child?
So many of my friends have asked this question to me because they have kids who are 8, 9 years old and they're now, being exposed to technology. And so the question becomes, how do I even start the conversation? And I would say defining the internet. At the most basic, and regardless of how old your child is, maybe you have a 17-year-old teen, having the conversation of what is the internet and who's on it. There are 5 billion people that use the internet. Are they all the same? Do they all use the internet for the same needs that we do? Do they have the same intentions? And then from there branching into, really putting our kids in the seat of leadership that I want to know, because there are so many billions of people online and some of them are out there looking to harm. I want to know, what do you think? would indicate to you that somebody online is dangerous. And having that conversation where we put them in the seat of, you tell me what red flags you would look out for. And now this opens up the opportunity for me to tell you if somebody is love bombing you right away and providing you compliments.
Love
and
bombing, so showering.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, within like a few minutes of connecting with somebody. If it starts to get sexual within a day of connecting with somebody, if they're switching platforms, if they're wanting you to keep secrets, if they're offering you things, that these are also predatory and unhealthy behaviors. And so it really opens up that space of, what would you look out for online? And then also the last piece, and I think this is the piece that parents really miss, is asking our kids and also providing them with 3 different alternatives of how to get out of situations online.
Oh, okay.
So I think that's something that we miss is we always talk about what signs to look out for, but we also have to give the exit strategy for our kids. And it can't just be one form of exiting. So in any situation where we're talking about giving consent, there are different ways that people say no. And we have to acknowledge what those different ways would look like online and not just speak to, I want you to block somebody or, I want you to come tell me right away. Give them 3 different options and alternatives so that they have this toolkit of strategies that they can implement when you're not monitoring them.
I'm going to ask you about those alternatives in a moment, but I want to put out our phone numbers as well. If you have any questions at all about, what are the red flags to watch out for, how to approach this conversation with your child, what do you need to know to protect your child from the possibility of online abuse or online exploitation? It is rising in record numbers. According to the Canadian Centre for Child Protection, there are record numbers of online victimization online, and their cyber tip line has received nearly 6,000 reports of online extortion. So how do you avoid this? How can you protect your child? What is the information you would like to know? What do you want to know about what the federal government, what the provincial government has announced, and how that applies to you? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can also hit pound 690 on your cell phone. By email, we're at bctoday@cbc.ca. And you can also text us at 236-330-2623. My guest is Tiana Sharifi, CEO of the Exploitation Education Institute. And so, okay, it's not just about you have to block them immediately. Come to me. What are the ways that kids might feel more comfortable in rejecting someone or saying no?
Absolutely. So I think that first of all, it's asking them that question. We do this when we go and we give presentations on consent and even consent digitally, we have the kids engage in a practice where we ask them to tell us no without using that word. And whatever ways they come up with is typically their more natural way of saying no. So it's putting out to the kid, what ways would you be comfortable with? Even if it comes down to you're talking to somebody that you like romantically, or you're talking to a friend, how would you feel comfortable saying no to them in that situation? Because at the end of the day, again, the people they're interacting with are friends and followers.
Regardless. And it's just giving them that agency, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
In any situation.
Absolutely. And it really puts them in that position of understanding that I take on the responsibility and I don't have control over who reaches out to me, but I have control over how I respond to it. So some things that we tell the kids is, you could blame it on your parents. My parents monitor my content. They're looking at my phone, I'm not allowed to, those kind of things. And of course, if somebody then is continuing to pressure, well, that's them crossing your boundaries and that's unhealthy. Blocking is fine. Of course, you don't owe anybody anything ever, and a no is a full sentence. But even saying things like, maybe we'll talk about this later, I have to go right now, and just giving some space for yourself, allowing some space for yourself to come up with ways that you feel comfortable. And at the very end of the day, too, thinking about what different number of adults are in your life that you trust. And maybe it's your parent, but maybe it's a teacher. Maybe it's an aunt. Maybe it's a youth worker or a counselor. And knowing that that's somebody that you can also go to and say, hey, I just got this message. I'm not sure how to respond.
Okay. establish those early on. We have a text from Terry and Souk wanting to know more about school awareness programs that teach students and parents how to protect young people from online sexual predators. Yeah, great question.
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually provide a presentation called Cyber Safe from Exploitation, and our presentations are supported by the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Public Safety. And so we provide presentations from grade 6 all the way to 12, talking about the psychology and the root causes that would lead to exploitation. We do it in a very lighthearted, engaging way with humor. And the one thing I actually do want to share, it's very exciting, is that we have partnered with Ally Global Foundation to create the first ever Canada-wide free interactive website with over 90 pieces of educational content that's animated for kids from grade 3 all the way to 12. And it's called the Prevention Project. It's going to be on a website called thepreventionproject.ca. It will be released on March 4th. So it will be freely accessible. I can't speak, too much about it, but I will say that we have animated videos that actually give parents and teachers the tools of how to have these conversations in a lighthearted way and give that guidance as well.
We're looking at a bit of a promotion
Yes.
for it right now, and it does look, very child friendly. There's animation,
Yes.
and people speaking and kids speaking, in fact, and yourself as well.
Yes.
Thepreventionproject.ca.
Thepreventionproject.ca.
Can they also catch that by going to your own website,
yes.
exploitationeducation.org?
Absolutely.
Okay,
yes.
exploitationeducation.org. Let me just we just have a few minutes left here with Tiana Sharifi of the Exploitation Education Institute. So do get your question in. If you want to know just what are the conversation starters or the questions you need to be asking your child, what you need to be aware of. This is your chance to ask an expert. So 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone as well. If you want to text us like Terry did, it's 236-330-2623, 236-330-2623. We're watching your emails as well at bctoday@cbc.ca. And you touched on this a little bit just a few moments ago, Tiana. What are the root causes? What makes someone vulnerable to online harms?
Yeah, so one of those pieces which we've talked about is language, the language that we use. The other piece is that our ability to experience a gut feeling, which is a physiological response to dangerous energy, is harder to feel and experience over the screen. And so we have to really understand the specific red flags that would give us that gut feeling. So things like an unhealthy age difference, somebody who's 5 years or older than you, somebody offering you things, or love bombing, switching platforms. So that's definitely another piece. And the last piece also is that when we're online, whether we're conscious of it or not, we're trying to get our needs met. And so a huge element of that risk is being aware of what needs am I trying to get met online? Do I, does social media give me self-esteem? Am I looking for connection, friendship, belonging? And then being mindful of making sure that somebody is not offering to meet that, in place of a healthy alternative.
So what does that mean then? Because if that is what you're seeking, how do you avoid someone who's offering to meet that need?
Absolutely. So the first piece is being aware of the needs that you have, and we all have these needs, right? And the second piece is being aware that if somebody is offering, let's say, so the love bombing, for example, is a play on the need for self-esteem. So if you have somebody that's doing that in a way that's not typical of somebody that you trust and have a relationship with, then that's a red flag. And if you're still wanting that need, there are healthy and safe methods to meet that need. And I think that's where it's our role as parents, as caregivers, as educators who know the children that we work with and that we communicate with and that we have. What do our kids need? And implementing those needs for them beforehand, before any form of exploitation.
I guess part of that might also be establishing that support network, whether it's other friends who can say, hey, that doesn't seem right, even though it feels good.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that support network, even if it's not, using you as a parent, if it's a trusted adult that you have that you can recommend to them. And absolutely. And just putting out there that if you ever have questions, talk to somebody about it, ask someone. And I think a really important piece that we haven't touched on, but I definitely want to suggest to parents, is making sure that you're not letting your kids believe that there will be a punitive consequence if they make a mistake online. Because what we see when we go and give presentations is there are so many kids who have been exploited and haven't told anybody and have held on to this because of the fear of their technology being taken away. So I think that we have to have more conversations with our kids as well, that we won't be judging them, there won't be shame, and there won't be punitive.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm going to squeeze in Day, who's just called us, actually from Toronto. Hi, Day. This is something that your family has been facing?
Hi, yes. Actually, my son is turning 15, and this for the third time, we've noticed there's some grooming going on online through Discord and Roblox. And this will be the third intervention. The first one, I think, was when it was around 10. The second, 12. The first one had actually been reported to the police, and the police were talking to him, discussing it with him to explain that it was an adult that he was talking with, not a little girl his age.
How have you stopped this? I'm sorry to jump in, Day. I just have a minute. How have you stopped this?
In the first two times, the internet, the phone was taken away completely. The first time wasn't a phone, it was a computer. It was taken away completely. We hadn't exactly gone into that whole online schooling yet, so it was pretty easy to just keep him off from online, and he was content with watching TV, etc. The second time a phone was taken away, and online was heavily monitored because we were online schooling at that point. And so it was heavily monitored, and he did not have access to it except for when he was in school.
Okay.
This time he's 14, and he has like a free number, so it's only Wi-Fi accessible.
Okay.
And so it's when he's playing games, I noticed that we caught the conversation
and
with
limiting
two other
it.
Adults. Yeah.
Day, I'm so sorry to jump in. I just have a minute. I want to make sure that Tiana is able to respond and give you some guidance moving forward, okay? Thank you so much, and I'm glad you've been able to put a stop to it for now. All the best to you and your son. Any advice in the last minute we have?
Absolutely. So the first thing I would say is looking at what is it that is creating that vulnerability and openness of your son to continue those kind of conversations. Is it the lack of knowledge of when to call it, a boundary, or when to call something a red flag? Is it the lack of knowing what to do when that happens? And also, is it just wanting to connect with people and wanting a safe peer group? Because if that's the case, there are so many resources that we can reach out to. There's boys and girls clubs, there's community centers, and things like that.
So get him active and finding ways to fulfill those needs.
Absolutely, yeah. And having explicit conversations about the things that you feel are dangerous, and putting it to him to talk about his.
Thank you so much. That's Tiana Sharifi.